Over the homework. I have a couple things I want to talk about today, and it's going to be more evolution on asteroids. However, this is going to be talking about how in a game that you make, you typically have to manage all your objects in them in a way that kind of lets you be able to understand information about all the other objects in the scene. So the reason is that for bullets that we have, we want them to collide with things, which are asteroids in our game and UFOs. And you want those bullets to be able to know about other objects, like if they hit an asteroid, for instance, or if the player hit an asteroid. And because of that, we're going to have to introduce a concept of a game engine. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today because we're going to go over how to spawn asteroids and how to handle destroying asteroids too. So we'll do that today. I'll do a little bit more work on things like player lives as well. That'll be a mechanic we'll talk about, and how to handle respawning. And then we'll discuss what we're going to be doing next week, which is we're going to be trying to start our final project next week. And that's going to be try to finish out our asteroids game by adding sound effects, adding player lives and spawning and levels, but also adding our own unique twist to the asteroids game. Last week I went over bullets and how to create a bullet object that moves by itself. For homework, I asked you to implement the behavior of having a cooldown, so after you fire your bullets, you're not allowed to fire another one until at least 0.2 seconds have passed, as well as add a couple of new behaviors, which is triple shot, that when you press control, it fires 3 bullets, one at the angle your ship is facing, and one at the 15 degrees to the left and right, and making the fire interval for these a little bit longer. Okay. All right. So I want to kind of go over again how to create bullets and manage them in our asteroids game. So starting kind of where we had left off with a player that was able to move around. This is a player that has the concept of drag and can teleport to the other side, and you can press up to move the player. And I've already created the object, which is represented by a bullet. And what I want to do is I want to make it so that when I press spacebar, a bullet gets spawned, or as long as the spacebar is pressed, a bullet is spawned. Now, there's a few ways you can do this. I want you to be able to press and hold the button so that you can't press the button more than you can't fire more than 5 bullets per second, which means that you have to at least wait 0.2 seconds before firing another one. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Originally, I had this set up like this, which is when you press the space bar, what we're going to do is we're going to add game objects for a bullet. And we're going to take this game object and we're going to spawn it where the player is. And I don't know if you remember, like, how if you have a property here, which is a position that you want to get access to, you have to add a function that lets you get that property. So this is a little bit of a review as well. And this kind of thing is something that's pretty common to do, which is you have this variable which is private or protected, and you want to be able to write a function to get that variable from the object. So I'm going to create a bullet here every time I press the spacebar. Now, remembering that these bullets have a lifetime associated with them, that they die after some period of time, I also want to make sure the bullets are going to be moving and rotating. Now, I can press the spacebar pretty quickly and get a lot more than 5 bullets per second. And I also want these bullets to be moving correctly. So I have to initialize their velocity here. And remembering that the velocity here is going to be based on the angle that the player is. So the player has this behavior using sine and cosine to determine what angle to apply its velocity against. So we're going to take that same behavior and we're going to apply it here as well. based on the player angle that he's facing. And this is kind of what I did last week in lab. This is more of a review. So I'm going to get the angle of the player, and I'm going to multiply it by, and then divide it by 360 to get the radians. And then I'm going to multiply it by how fast I want these bullets to move. I take this velocity, and that's what the bullet velocity is going to be. Create a function that lets me take a vector 2f. And now I can push this bullet back that has been assigned the correct velocity. I haven't done anything with controlling this, the rate of fire. I'm just making it so these bullets will actually fire in the right direction. Also, let me make sure that I do negative cosine here. So these bullets are firing, and they're firing at too fast of a frequency. Now, if I press and hold the spacebar, you can see that the rate of fire is a little bit too high. So what we need to do is we need to maintain the rate of fire so that the rate of fire is managed by the player. So the player should know when the last time he fired was, and when you press the spacebar, you should ignore the next time that you press it if you are still not recovered from the previous shot. So we can do this in one of two ways. I'm going to do this here in our main function first, but then I'm going to talk about moving this and how we're going to actually move this object into our player so that our player can be responsible for shooting bullets. This is going to be part of our discussion on how we get asteroids and collision detection to work correctly. So for now, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the concept of kind of like a weapon cooldown. And this variable is going to represent if this number is 0 or less, you're allowed to fire. And until this variable is 0 or less, you're going to ignore any firing behavior. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, weapon cooldown. I'm just going to add, I'm just going to subtract DT from it. Think of it like an ability cooldown. And this ability cooldown, like in any RPG or any MMO, like it goes down 1 per second. So because it starts at 0, it's going to go negative initially. But that's fine. As long as it's negative or 0, I should be allowed to fire. So what I'm going to do is say if I have pressed the spacebar and my weapon cooldown is less than or equal to 0, then do this. Now every time I fire a bullet, I need to reset the weapon cooldown. So just to prove that this works, I'm going to set my weapon cooldown to 1 second at the start, which will make it so that every time I fire a bullet, this cooldown goes to 1, and then I have to wait another second before a bullet gets fired again. So if I hold this down now, you can see that my rate of fire here is 1 per second. And that's just because if I look at this variable, if I print this variable out here, I'm going to print this out to the console and pin it here to the left. You guys can see that weapon cooldown is currently negative. I don't have to keep subtracting it if it's negative, but I like it just keeps it simple. And every time I press spacebar, it goes back to 1. You can see it's resetting to 1 and counting back down to 0 again. And unless it's less than 0, I won't be allowed to fire. So even though I'm pressing the spacebar or holding it, it doesn't let me fire it anymore. I can adjust this weapon cooldown, so when I go to reset it, instead of resetting it to 1 second, I can reset it to whatever I want the weapon cooldown to be, which will be 0.2 seconds. Now, this rate that I'm firing at, you notice when I press and hold spacebar, it takes a little bit of time for the next bullets to appear. Well, this is because this is Windows telling us that, hey, there's a repeat delay. So if you guys ever go to your keyboard settings, there's this repeat delay here, and this value actually controls how long it takes before spacebar gets detected as repeat. So here I'm pressing in, the repeat delay is short. I set it to long, and see how long of delay it is. I don't really want that. I don't want to rely on Windows to tell me whether or not I'm repeating it. So instead of doing this stuff as an event, I'm going to actually just ask to see if you're currently firing. So just like how we're asking to see if a key is pressed, what we're going to do is we're going to ask to see if you're currently pressing space. I'm going to move all this behavior down here. And I'm going to say if weapon cooldown is less than or equal to 0, then you can spawn a bullet. I just move that out of the event here because that's the problem with events, is that if you want any kind of like repeat behavior, or you want to know whether you've held a button or not, you have to put that inside this if statement, which is, hey, ask Windows to see if you're currently pressing it. The reason is that I'm pressing and holding it now, and now I can press and hold it. It doesn't really matter what my repeat interval is on the keyboard. As long as I'm pressing and holding it, then it'll fire. Okay. Any questions on that? We actually used this before in the Pong stuff. This same behavior can be reused for any kind of cooldown. You basically just have a number that starts at some value and you count down to 0. Okay. Okay. Now, next what I wanted to do is when I press Control, I wanted the ability to fire a triple shot, which is, hey, fire 3 bullets, 1 at the angle your ship is facing, 1 15 degrees to the left, and 1 15 degrees to the right. This is pretty straightforward because we already have this behavior that fires a bullet. Well, we could actually take this, we can make a function out of it if we wanted to, and maybe that's the best way to do it. I'll show you how we do it without using a function. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tie these weapon cooldowns together, but I'm going to treat the control key the same way as the spacebar key. I'm going to use left control here. I'm going to copy this whole thing. And instead of doing this once, I just need to do this 3 times with a loop, 1 for each angle that I want to go. Now I need to add an angle in here. So what I can do is I can take this angle and I can add 15 degrees to it based on what I is. This isn't really going to work right because all of the bullets are going to be skewed to the right, but it'll get me started in the right direction. So when I press left control, I'm going to loop 3 times, and for every time I go through this loop, I'm going to create a new bullet. So there's my 3. You can see here that based on where my ship is pointing, it's actually aiming slightly to the right. That's because when we add the angles in, the first time I go through this, the angle is going to be the ship angle, and then I'm going to add 15 times I. So this is going to be 0. The next time, for the second bullet, this is going to be 15. And then the third time, for the third bullet, this is going to be 30. So we want to change this so that it actually doesn't add a 0 as an angle. The first time, I want to add negative 15 as the angle. So we can actually just adjust our loop here. We don't have to start I at 0. We can actually start at negative 1. And so I will start at negative 1, which will mean that this will be minus 15 to start, then 0, then 15 degrees. And I can change my loop so that the amount that I iterate over is different. So now when I shoot my bullets, they go in a spread from the start. Okay? So really all I needed to do was write a loop that lets me fire this angle 3 times. There is a way to make this a little bit better though. I can make a function that does this too, that lets me spawn a bullet, which I'll do right now. So I can make a spawn bullet function that takes a player as a pointer. And this spawn bullet function will also take an angle for where I want to spawn the bullet at. And then if I do this, I can remove this duplicated code. I'm always on the lookout for code that's been duplicated more than once. And here, these 2 things are very similar, with the only difference being the angle that I pass in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this code, I'm going to cut it out of there, and I'm going to put it at the top here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the angle here. And then game objects here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the bullet that I created. This function is basically responsible for figuring out the angle, spawning the bullet, and setting the velocity, and then returning that bullet once it's been created. So down here in my function where I'm pressing the spacebar, I can do game objects push back, and I can call spawn bullet as a function and push back the result of this function immediately. And it takes two arguments, the player and the angle of the player. The only difference here is that this is always going to be using the player angle. This function down here I can remove now. And instead of using the player angle, I'm going to just take the player angle plus I times 15. So I've now deduplicated this code. I can go a little bit further too. I can take this if statement for weapon cooldown and I can put it here like so, outside of the if statement. So let me just fix this up a little bit. I'm going to remove a lot of this code because I have a lot of duplicated stuff that I don't want to have copied. And so I want to simplify this down. Now my if statement for bullet spawning comprises of, hey, is the weapon cooldown less than or equal to 0? If so, you're allowed to test whether the space or left control is pressed. And then once in that case that you detected it, then you can actually spawn the bullet and pass it back to the game object. It's the same exact code. I've just done a refactor of this logic. So now I have a function that does the spawning of the bullet, and I just call that function once, and I get the same behavior. It doesn't look any different, but the code is more straightforward to read. I don't have duplicate code. I just have a game object push back, and then I spawn a bullet. Okay. All right. There was one other part of the lab which I kind of wanted to go over too, which is hey, I asked you to create a bullet every time you press spacebar that shot behind you. Really, using this function now, I just have to pass in a negative angle here. I think I might have to. I'll just add 180 to this here because I don't want to pass in a negative angle. If I spawn two bullets, one facing the player angle and one facing the behind the player angle, I can now set it up so that whenever I fire a bullet, it fires one behind me as well. Same concept as creating these multi-shots. Now, this behavior here for multi-shot, I can actually make it shoot more than just 3, right? I can say, let's see, -5. This is 11. So every time I fire, it creates a bunch. You can see if I can 15 angle, 15 degrees. Okay. So we can create these bullets as many as we want to, and that function will let me reuse those bullets. And I can change the speed of those bullets too by just changing the function that I created here. Like so. That function works for both. So when I'm pressing spacebar, it's the same behavior here. Okay. All right. Questions on that?